All right, Doug, today is Q&A Friday, so we got a bunch of questions from our viewers. Just to the viewers, I should say, we love the questions. Ask them in any of the comments of the videos. We go through them, kind of collate them, and then get through as many of those questions as we can each Friday. So please keep them coming. First, I want to talk. We had one episode where we kind of lamented the idea that we were very gloomy about things, and it wasn't very, and how that wasn't really certainly going to help our audience if we keep being so gloomy. But we had two different people who posted this Ayn Rand quote, which I think is really useful, and says, she says, "We can ignore reality, but we can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality." And I think for that reason, it's good to focus on some gloomy stuff.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Ayn Rand. The main problem I have with her is that she didn't go far enough in some ways, but she really is a watershed. How people feel about Rand tells you so much about their psychology, their spiritual beings, if you would. Although she wouldn't
Couldn't acknowledge that even exists.
exactly. But okay, well, thanks for your opinion, Miss Rand. I mean, I don't know either, but the problem with Ayn Rand was not what she said so much. It was that the people that followed her dogmatically were really like a religious cult. Quite amazing, actually, intelligent, rational people, but they were like a religious cult. But on the other hand, people that automatically hate Ayn Rand tend to be people that they're like on the opposite side of the philosophical barricades from, say, you and I presume most of the people that are listening now. Okay, well, quote Jesus, well, he was without fault, let him cast the first stone. So
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, anytime you get into this dogmatic following of any leader, and you could, like, I mean, they call them Randians. I mean, that's it's risky anytime you get into that kind of territory, but there's so much good in it. I recently reread The Virtue of Selfishness, and I mean, there's so much really good stuff in there. So I think she's a genius in many ways.
yeah, no question about it, actually.
Okay, so let's get to one of the questions. It says, love to talk about principles. And we basically were trying to compare, this was our video on the Great Reset. And we were talking about how they were focusing on words like inclusion and diversity and trying to put those forward as virtues, or as the values that we should be following. But, you instead offered you said that they weren't actual virtues. And so this person is saying that, there are 100, sorry, this person says that they love to talk about principles. They love it when we're talking about virtues instead, and it's really important that we essentially don't allow these fake virtues to supersede some of the core virtues that have made us what we are. So it's not really a question, but I think it's worth talking about. I don't know if you want to talk about this one in this entire episode.
Those are all social engineering points, actually. If you're going to properly socially engineer a society, those things are very helpful, but they have nothing to do with, moral positives, or they're just things you want to do if you want to. Yeah, you're right.
Social engineering. Okay, so you mentioned debunking democracy in one of the episodes we did, and there are a couple people in the comments that really wanted to hear that debunking. Now, I don't know if you want to save that for a whole other episode, or if you just want to maybe give people a little sampling of what you mean now.
Yeah, we should talk about it some other time in a separate episode. I'll just say that, look, democracy can work if it's a small group of people that have basically an awful lot in common, have the same culture, the same language, the same religion, all these things. Yeah, then you can vote. But having a democracy in a place like the United States, first of all, we don't have a democracy. This is a big conversation, but we actually have a multicultural domestic empire. And the problem with it, with trying to pretend it's a democracy, is when you vote, and of course, the voters are voting for whoever's going to give them the most, or appear to give them or their group the most. Um, you're trying to take control of the government through a democracy, determine who your rulers are, and they're going to quash the enemy domestically. So, no, democracy is a formula for disaster in a society like we have today. So, okay, so that opens up. We'll talk about this later.
All right. Yeah, this is a big topic, and I definitely don't want to short circuit it. So let's save it for next week in a whole episode. So this question is in reference to a video where you just said, the free market should decide things like who you work for and, the competition between businesses. And he says, well, in the real world, cliques form that tend to discriminate against competition. The danger in what Doug says here is just let the market solve it, is how can you compete with Amazon or Walmart? Main Street businesses will continue to be destroyed, especially when the government favors these large, multinational companies versus mom and pops.
Well, of course, he's right. Cliques always form. And it was Adam Smith that observed, and I wish I ought to commit his exact quote to memory. This is close. He says, in any gathering, even if it's for purely social purposes, men of the same business will invariably collude and try to figure how they can charge more or, generally take advantage of the public. And he made that observation long before Walmart, like he made that observation in roughly 1776.
Right.
I mean, the Wealth of Nations and Gibbon's Decline and Fall both came out in 1776, oddly enough. Kind of an interesting year from that point of view. So, look, no, you're never going to get around people trying to get together to advantage themselves to the detriment or presumed detriment of the public. But frankly, who cares? As long as the government can't enforce can't enforce the monopolies that businessmen always try to create, always prefer, who cares? Because in a free market, if these guys succeed in charging more money and offering crappier products, it just opens the way for competition, unless you have a government which gives them legal privileges. And then you're a criminal if you break the law. So that's how it works. So I don't care about Walmart and Amazon. They provide a huge variety of goods very cheaply. The problem is if they're given some kind of special political privileges. I don't think Walmart ever has been. I understand that Amazon, certainly now, doing so much business with the government through its computer operations.
Yep.
I'm sure they do.
Yep.
And I'm sure Bezos is all hooked up with the bad guys that live within the Beltway. So it's changed from that point of view. But is there anything we can do about it? I don't think there is, frankly.
Well, it is the tie-up of these businesses with the government that really causes the disadvantage to the mom and pop stores. It's not the fact that the businesses are so big in themselves, but there are things on a local or state level where, they offer tax incentives for these companies, for bigger companies, certainly like Amazon, to build its headquarters here, or to build a distribution center. So they offer them tax incentives and tax rebates that a mom and pop business wouldn't get. So the government is essentially supporting the competition of these mom and pops. But it wouldn't be possible if the government didn't tax the local citizens and then allocate those resources as an incentive to get these big companies to come and do business there. Then also you have how none of them have managed to, Amazon is businesses doing better than ever. Walmart's also better than ever. And, they're not forced to close, but how's that decided? It's the government that's making that happen. It's not, the government's not helping the mom and pop. It's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, the government hurts mom and pop because they can't afford the proper tax counsel to keep their taxes low. They can't afford the legal counsel to overcome regulations. These big companies can do that. So the bigger the government, the more it accrues to the advantage of big companies for that reason. But look, you don't want to penalize somebody for offering products that are better and cheaper, and generally they do. The only problem is you don't want the government giving them advantages. So the boogeyman here is not these big companies, it's the government.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Next question is, does Doug still live in Argentina?
Yes, and Uruguay, mostly in Uruguay these days. But I feel like I'm kind of a homeless person, actually. So, you
How long
know,
have you felt that way?
yeah, it's a psychological thing. There are people, in fact, most people that I've known throughout my life, they're born in an area, they know people there, their family is there, so they become rooted there. And maybe that's a good thing. Uh, it's not the way I've played the game, though. So, it, will I stay in Argentina and Uruguay? Well, at this point, where do I really want to go? I wouldn't mind relocating to Thailand, totally different. It's not only the exact polar opposite of the world, but it's a polar opposite in terms of what the culture, what the society is like. But I'm attracted to Thailand too, and two total opposites. And frankly, I don't really much like being in the United States anymore. Uh, I really don't, because this country is going in the wrong direction so quickly.
Hmm.
Anyway, the
Have you
answer to the
ever,
question is yeah,
have
I
you,
guess I'm still down there.
have you ever wished that you had that rooted feeling that you see in others? Have you ever gone,
Hmm.
well, maybe there's an upside to that, and ever desired that for yourself?
Yeah, I can see the advantages to it. I can, but
Just didn't weren't
it,
born with
it wouldn't it wouldn't do if we all liked chocolate. I mean, it's nice to have other flavors too.
it. I agree with you 100%. Okay. Someone asked an interesting question. I'm not sure I will interpret it right, but I'll see how you interpret it. Say, what is the striking difference between a George Soros character and a Doug Casey character?
Yeah, I read that when you sent me this list and I looked it over. George Soros doesn't write novels, so it must not quite be referring to that.
Uh,
I don't know, I'd say all the difference in the world.
hmm,
George Soros really wants to control other people and what they do and what they think and where they go. And the way I see it, all I want to do is put out ideas because they're good karma and hopefully they will improve things. But I don't want to make anybody do anything.
hmm.
That seems to me to be the biggest difference. I've never met Soros, oddly enough. I'm a very old and reasonably close friend with Jimmy Rogers, his partner in the Quantum Fund. They were partners for many years. And I've asked Jim, listen, so what kind of a guy is Soros? And what do you think of his beliefs and so forth? Because Jim is an anarcho-capitalist like we are. So how could he have been hooked up with Soros for all those years and made himself a billionaire too? Jim lives in Singapore now. And he said, we honestly never talked about that stuff.
Hmm.
It's hard to believe, but that's what he says. And it's probably, I think it's probably true.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I was thinking too. That's the biggest striking difference is the desire to coerce others seems to be the dividing line here, the big one. Um, okay,
Yeah.
someone has a question about the Baltics. We talked about the Baltics as as an interesting place to be, but they wonder if do you think the Baltics are at risk of Russia's expanding sphere of influence?
Well, in the past, they obviously were, but the world has changed and it's very different from the way it was in ancient times when if there was a prosperous little country next door to you, it made sense to invade it. Why? Well, you could steal all their gold and all their artwork and and steal enslave the people who had a market value. You could sell them. So Yeah. And then later, you could tax the ones that are still there. And conquest was actually a positive sum game if you could conquer them. Okay. Of course, there were indirect and delayed consequences that showed that, well, yeah, at first it was a good idea, but then it turned out to be a bad idea for all kinds of reasons. But today, it's a bad idea from the very beginning, because in today's world, with technology as advanced as it is, and communication as good as it is, and the nature of production the way it is, conquering a country and stealing the national treasury, I mean, it makes no sense. It's going to be costly. I mean, it costs money to do that. And there's not much you can steal from a country and bring home. So no, I'd say that the odds of, no, Russia is not going to try to conquer the Baltics. It's just, it would be stupid. It would be totally uneconomic, totally non-productive. You'd just be asking for trouble in about a dozen different ways. So no, which is actually a reason why NATO should have been disbanded when the Soviet Union fell apart, but it's gotten bigger and uglier than ever. So this is a false fear.
Right. Well, and of course, Afghanistan isn't in the U.S. sphere of influence directly, but clearly it demonstrates the desire to the dangers of trying to conquer a foreign land. It certainly has cost us a hell of a lot more than we might have ever gained from it.
It's just incredibly stupid.
So stupid.
One of the most poorest, backward, most primitive, alien countries in the world.
Let's own it.
Let's own it. Right. I mean, it's actually criminally insane. That's the only way you can describe it. It's criminally insane.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about sci-fi books in the past. Someone asked if you watch any sci-fi films, or what might be your favorites.
Yeah, sure. I didn't make a list. I saw that question, but I didn't make a list. What would, I guess my favorite is probably Blade Runner. Was great. Everybody
Original.
The original, not the remake. I think I like Silent Running with Bruce Dern. That was pretty good. What others are there?
Well, they mentioned a couple here. They mentioned
So many.
Judge Dredd and Elysium and Minority Report, things like that.
Oh yeah, yes. And he mentions that those are takeoffs on the works of Philip K. Dick.
Yep.
But I don't know if we've talked about this before, but I've tried reading. I tried reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which of course was this jumping off point for Blade Runner. Can't see the relationship between the two of them. I mean, Dick's novels, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're just about unreadable. I tried reading The Man in the High Castle.
Yep.
I couldn't get through it, but I've seen some episodes of the TV series.
It's good.
Quite good.
Yeah.
So, I guess different strokes for different folks. Can't read his novels. Love the TV and movie takes.
Yeah, I've always felt like he's the most popular unread author. Like everyone knows him and likes him, but you can't find anybody who's really devoured his novels and go, these things are gems.
Yeah, isn't that strange? But he certainly, if you look closely, a great source of very interesting ideas if the movies and the TV series have anything to do with it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt.
There's a bunch of other movies. I mean, I really like the Alien series. Mm-hmm. The first one was kind of a mystery or horror movie, kind of. And the second was a war movie. And the third was a prison movie. That was the weakest of them. And then Alien Resurrection was actually quite excellent.
I didn't see that.
Like that. The Terminator movies, especially, well, both of them. The early two. After that, the series fell apart. So yeah, there's all kinds of great sci-fi out there.
Yeah, there's a new show I started watching on HBO called Raised by Wolves, which is interesting.
I like that. I like that idea.
Yeah, it's good. It's a sci-fi. It's a sci-fi show. I think just check it out. I know you have HBO. Check it out. You might like it. It's interesting.
I'll look for it. Raised by Wolves. I like the concept. It might be good to be raised by wolves for a year or so, but not during your entire childhood.
This one is the wolves are actually a neuromancer android that has incredible killing power, and it's raising the future of humanity. That's
Oh,
kind of the basis of it.
oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So, Doug, the election stuff is still, seemingly up in the air. It depends on who you talk to about it, but they want to know what your expectations are if Trump succeeds to revert the election results.
Uh, I think there's going to be violence, quite frankly. I mean, you've got to remember that there are immensely powerful people in the deep state, and we've described who's in the deep state, and it really does exist, that aren't going to like that very much. And, a lot of the common people out there will listen. This is a witch's brew. It doesn't matter who wins. We're looking at real trouble at this point because the Trump won in 2016 because it was kind of a cultural counter-revolution. That's what it was really all about. I mean, Trump representing kind of old cultural values. So this is completely unpredictable, except that I don't see any way around it being very ugly, especially since the economy is really heading for a collapse. And that's going to be the match that lights the keg of dynamite, in addition to whoever wins. Now, this is a major turning point in American history.
It seems like it's like no matter whether Biden is sworn in January 21st or not, there's 70 million or so Trump voters that I think are clearly convinced that the election was a fraud. And with that environment, that like bitter seed planted, it's hard to imagine, how this bears fruit in the future. It seems like it's gonna go bad.
Exactly. Not only do they feel defrauded, but now the people that control the government, they know they hate them. I mean, they really hate each other. So this cannot end well.
Yeah, but if it seems like Trump voters generally, at least so far, you see they really are the peaceful protest people. They believe in
Yeah,
American
yeah,
values and law and justice, blah blah blah, which doesn't seem to work in their favor. Whereas the other side, does seem ready to loot and burn, kind of at the drop of a hat, which I think all looting and burning is, of course, terrible. But you think that if Trump that like immediate violence only happens if somehow Trump retains office, right? It's the protesters of the Biden people, the Biden protesters.
yeah. Anything can happen because the the guys in the so-called red states, we've discussed that they should be called the red states. That was cleverly reversed. They should be the blue states for lots of reasons, but different story. Listen, they're going to be very unhappy, and especially as the economy goes downhill.
Right.
I don't know what they're going to do or what they can do, because with the bad guys at that point, well, they're all bad guys within the Beltway, uh, quite frankly. But with the overt collectivists controlling the guns and the court system and the rest of it, I'm not sure what they can do about it.
Hmm. Well, then, Biden coming out just saying that, we're going to have a 100-day mask mandate when he comes into office.
Oh, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
So it's like,
That, I'm glad I'm not going to be here for that.
I know I'm jealous. Yeah. Well, so the demanding this physical compliance essentially among everybody. And, there's, you and I were privately talking about some of these economic stats that are coming out, which seem largely ignored by everybody. Like no one's really paying attention to the economic realities of what's happening.
No, in this Zoom meeting I had with my friends in Argentina, this group called the Round Table, which has been in existence for 100 years, and 8 Brits, 8 Americans, 8 Argentines, all very successful, top guys. And, we were talking about the stock market and the economy, and not one of them, and I just dummied up because I wanted to listen. And none of them talked about the increases in the money supply in the US. They were just talking about what the political situation was going to do to the stock market. Nobody even considered the amount of money being created. And these are these are not just your average man in the street who doesn't have a clue about it. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And so the next question was response to a video we did where we talked about capital controls are inevitably coming to the US and maybe more and more everywhere in the world. And their question was, well, are you talking about Trump doing that or someone else? And I guess my question to you is, based upon this, is does it actually even matter who's running the government, quote unquote, whether or not we'll end up having capital controls in the US?
No, from that point of view, it doesn't matter at all, because Trump has proved himself to be quite a dirigiste with his arbitrarily, single-handedly starting a trade war with China, and then with Europe, and even with Canada and Mexico. So if it seems to him like a good idea to have foreign exchange controls, and why would we have them? Well, for the same reason that Nixon slapped them on back in the early 70s, because the dollar's dropping in value. So we got to stop people from exporting dollars and buying foreign currencies. Got to stop them. So Trump is quite capable of doing that, but so is Biden. I mean, because neither group has a clue about economics. The reason why people like Trump is because he's genuine, whether you like him or not. I mean, he's not pre-programmed, and because he's a cultural conservative relative to the opposition. But economically, he's actually a moron. He's an ignoramus. He's dangerous. So I think we're going to get FX controls either way, quite frankly.
All right. Someone asks, with everything with reality as gloomy as it is, how do we mentally thrive given the reality? And he says,
Was it mentally thrive?
How do we mentally thrive? Yeah. He says, I remember that H.L. Mencken suffered the rest of his life. Or I said, I remember reading that H.L. Mencken suffered the rest of his life once he figured out how things really are.
Yeah, I'm very empathetic with the way Mencken's life evolved. I read a biography of him, and that's true. And during World War I and World War II, Mencken just dummied up. I mean, he wasn't writing anything that could be controversial, because you could be drawn and quartered and hung and pilloried, by the chimpanzees out there who might suspect that maybe you were sympathetic with the other side as being human beings. I mean, maybe not the management, certainly not of Germany and Japan, but the average German and the average Japanese. So no, you can't say anything. When the mob gets into a real hysteria, if you don't want to be torn limb from limb, you've got to just dummy up. And we were talking earlier about the fact you just go to a normal gathering, a group of guys like at a Rotary Club, and you can't really say too many things that are too far out of the mainstream, or you will be pilloried and kind of moved out of the group. So, yeah.
How do you maintain your mental tranquility, how do you mentally thrive, was a specific question in this sort of reality that we're experiencing?
Well, maybe this is why a lot of people dig further into their silos and only hang out with people that share their worldview. Do that and read books and things of that nature. So, look, I don't go out and try to convince anybody of anything. Basically, I like to ask questions for two reasons. Number one, if you ask a question, person answers, you can find out who he really is based on his answer. So asking questions is much more helpful than making lots of statements, which can just antagonize the guy. And the second reason you want to ask a question is if you're dealing with somebody who's reasonably intelligent, if he tries to answer the question and he finds he can't do it, maybe that'll lead him to ask more questions and question his premises. So that's all I can do. That's all I try to do is just ask questions, although sometimes I can't help myself. And we'll state a proposition, but then I won't argue with other people about it after I state it. I just state it because, hey, you got to say something that's true sometimes, even if, listen, it's a real problem when you're a genetic freak. And frankly, libertarians are genetic freaks.
That's for sure. Someone asked about Uruguay. How does one acquire citizenship in Uruguay?
It's not hard, actually. You have to live there. I mean, that is part of it. But Uruguay is unusual. Most countries have really very definite and legalistic, and here's what you have to do, and here's how long you have to be here, and so forth. Uruguay, you have to be recommended by I think 3 other citizens who are not lawyers or real estate brokers or doctors, people that you just get to know on a commercial basis. And, you have to spend significant time in the country, but they're pretty loose about that. And I think it's only 3 years after you get what is called a cedula. This is the formal part. You have to apply for permanent residence. Then after you get your permanent residence, called a cedula, 3 years later, you can ask to be made a citizen. And I mean, your Spanish doesn't even have to be that great. You're supposed to be able to speak, reasonable Spanish. I guess my Spanish is kind of reasonable, but it's not great. So yeah, now actually Argentina is much easier than Uruguay. And it's actually a marginally better passport, which is to say, I think you can go to 1 or 2 more countries without having to get a formal visa. So yeah, there are places like that. And of course, Paraguay is a different thing entirely. Simply get your permanent residence, come back 3 years later, take a simple test and become a Paraguayan. That's the easiest of all. And having to, all these South American countries are different, but.
So the question is, I guess, is it difficult to get permanent residency in Uruguay? Because that's the first step, where you actually have to apply and they have to accept you, right?
No, I don't think it's difficult at all because I have permanent residence in Uruguay. Everybody should have at least permanent residence in a couple other countries. And as I recall, it wasn't hard at all. All you do is you get a local lawyer or a local fixer, somebody who's not a lawyer but knows how the game is played. And it's pretty easy, and it doesn't cost any money, and you should do it.
Got it.
I mean, if not Uruguay, certainly then Argentina or
Panama.
Chile or any of these countries. I mean, Bolivia, that country's really just way too screwed up at this point and is likely to stay screwed up. And Ecuador and Peru are problematical. And I mean, there's a race thing that is once again rearing its head in South America, in countries that have large populations of Native Americans, Indians. And it's pretty much like this thing with blacks in the US, where they've decided, hey, we've been badly done by. Well, in a way they have been. I mean, I understand the arguments that they make, and there's some reasons to it, but there's some countries that are more desirable than others. I'd say Brazil is a good choice too.
Yeah, definitely. I have a couple of friends who live there. They love it. So one of the last questions we have is, they ask for a discussion on the money supply, T-bills, US dollar, bond market, and stock market, which is obviously unlimited topic there. But they say, we appear to be back in bubble in equities, and it should end badly in the next year. Rates will have to normalize, and that sets the course for a major depression. US will have no buyers for its bonds. Looks ugly 6 to 9 months out.
Yeah, no argument for me. Yeah, I don't know what the timing is going to be right, but be like. But higher they, the higher they build this house of cards, the further it has to fall. So yeah, absolutely. Tough times. Tough times coming. Big financial upset. Don't put too much money in the stock market. You're playing with fire. I wouldn't have any money in the bond markets. Yeah, sure.
All right. So one of the last things is, we did probably the most controversial video, which surprised me, we've done so far. We've talked about some topics that I think are very much more controversial than this one ought to have been. But we talked about, Fed coin, and we talked about Bitcoin and other digital currencies essentially within that conversation. And and there were a lot of comments on it that were pretty negative. And because something that I said, which is I said, I'd come to the conclusion based upon uh, something that you told me, that it's possible that Bitcoin might actually prove to be a better form of money than even gold. And that was based upon these five principles of Aristotle, and how we defined good money. And you want to briefly summarize what those are for people and understand, kind of, so they can just understand the thinking behind this?
Yeah. Uh, as we talked about yesterday, I anyway was a late adopter of Bitcoin because I looked at the five characteristics of a good money. Durable. Is Bitcoin durable? Yes, I guess it is. As long as the electrical system and computers exist, yes, it's durable. Uh, in fact, you could argue it's more durable than gold because gold can be lost, in which case you don't have it anymore. Well, you can lose your Bitcoins too, but anyway, they're equally durable. Let's say different, but equally durable. Divisible. Well, obviously, uh, since it's a mathematical thing, Bitcoin is infinitely divisible. It's an academic difference in divisibility between Bitcoin and gold. Uh, Convenient. Well, yeah, in some ways it's more convenient because if you have, you know, many millions of dollars worth of gold, it takes up a lot of space. You got to store it. You've got to guard it. But with Bitcoin, it's on your cell phone. Different set of problems, but they're different, but equally convenient, consistent. Yeah, one Bitcoin is just like the other, just like 1 ounce of 999 gold is just like any others. Okay, that's good. And the problem that I had was the value. What's the value of Bitcoin? I mean, you can't use it for anything. You can definitely use gold for stuff, everything from dentistry to jewelry to 1,000 different technological things. It's one of the 92 naturally occurring elements. But what do you use Bitcoin for? It's just almost like a figment of your imagination, if you would. Well, you can't argue with the market, and the market accepts it as being of value. But why do they do that? And I think the main reason is because it's an excellent transfer device. You don't have to hold it for the rest of your life. But if you want to get value that's liquid from point A to point B, most particularly from a country that's got a dog shit currency worth nothing within, and you want to get your wealth out of it, Bitcoin is an ideal way to transfer it. And you can either keep it but there's a lot of reasons why people are buying more Bitcoin and why I think it's actually going to go a lot higher at this point. So this isn't saying own Bitcoin, forget about gold. That's old clunky money. No, they're different. But Bitcoin is proving its value,
Mm.
and its value is as a transfer mechanism and a form of actual electronic money where you don't have to trust anybody to store your gold. Or so, yeah. Listen, it's a different reality that didn't exist until recently, and it seems to be working. So, yeah, I'm a fan of Bitcoin. It's going higher.
Yeah,
It
well,
doesn't mean I'm anti-gold. I'm super positive on gold.
right. I mean, your reputation is quite tied to your longstanding support of gold, I think. You
Yeah,
know,
there's no conflict. I mean, just try to keep an open mind about these things and try not to be dogmatic
yeah,
about these things. You got to look at the facts and and see what they are. Hey, what did Rand say? Reality exists, right?
exactly. Yeah, and I would say one thing is people go, well, Bitcoin. Some of the comments, Bitcoin is in a bubble. It has no intrinsic value. I mean, all of the criticisms.
I'm
Very
not sure,
positive.
I'm not sure Bitcoin is in a bubble, quite frankly, because so few people own it.
Right, and I'll tell you, based upon the comments, it seems like it is hated
And
by
it's
more
hey,
people. So it seems like it's hated. It doesn't seem like it's at the top.
yeah, exactly. When everybody loves it, and yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, and some of the other things, just a couple of little things about it, where people saying, well, what if, it's not that the government can't control it if they want to. They could certainly, they could. There's lots of controls. If you're a law abiding person and they make it illegal, most people are not going to transact in Bitcoin because they don't, they want to follow the law. Most people do that. So that's
Yeah,
true. And
yeah,
but they did that with gold.
yeah, exactly. Up until quite recently, I mean, throughout the 30s and 40s and 50s and 70s, gold was illegal. I mean, not just illegal, but I mean, serious punishment type illegal in most of the world's countries.
Right. Well, and I mean, there's some really interesting. Like, I didn't realize that when FDR, banned private ownership of gold. I didn't realize how strictly it was actually enforced, and I found a number of articles where they were actually, they used the Secret Service essentially to track people down who were gold hoarders and put them in prison.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, the government is a risk always, regardless of the asset class. I think that's really the point. So. All right. Well, I think that's about all the questions I got through today, Doug. Anything else you wanted to share with people as we enter into the weekend of gloomy uncertainty in the world?
Well, I guess we're going to know pretty soon whether Trump is going to stay in the White House or not. So I don't know what's going on in back of behind the scenes, but yeah, it's not going to end well. But
It's going to be exciting.
it's going to be exciting. Yeah, it's going to be interesting in the Chinese version of that word, as in may you live in interesting times, which is a curse.
It is curse. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that, Doug. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.